Fighting Blindness Canada's Young Leaders Program is a career-oriented initiative that provides young people living with vision loss in Canada with the tools they need to develop their skills and pursue rewarding careers. The session you are about to watch is a recording. To learn more about our upcoming programs, please visit us online at fightingblindness.ca/youngleaders. The Young Leaders Program is proudly supported by RBC Future Launch, Johnson & Johnson, and Rhythm Pharmaceuticals. We hope that you enjoyed this session and share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.
Thanks a lot. I'm very excited for the Move the Dial workshop and in particular this panel as well. I'll quickly describe myself. So I am a 30-year-old South Asian male with a light beard and medium length hair, which are tucked back in a small ponytail, and I'm wearing a orange polo shirt and shorts, which you cannot see. So this panel is about sports mental health. I had made people's bios in a document that I lost, so I'm gonna prompt here. So I will let the panelists introduce themselves. So my apologies for that. Let's go around to the panelist. Conrad, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Conrad Eder. I live in Ottawa, for those of you who might be in the city, and I'm a blind hockey player. So a little bit about me. I play for Canada's national blind hockey team. Blind hockey is a sport played very much like conventional hockey, but exclusively by athletes who are visually impaired, like many of us today. I'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about some of the adaptations in the sport and a little bit more about why I got interested in the first place. But I'll just also quickly mention, as Morgan did off the top, that I've been a part of the Young Leaders Program now for many years. Really excited to be able to, I think maybe the first time ever, or at least the first time that I've been a part of the program, to really talk about athletics and athletics through an accessibility lens, which I'm really grateful for all the fellow panel participants to get the message out there that sports really is an inclusive environment, and there's opportunities for all of us, regardless of our level of vision, to participate in athletics at quite competitive and elite levels too.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. Also, do you want to describe yourself as well for people who are not fully blind?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing that I can describe is the yellow jersey that I'm wearing. For those of you who can't see, it may not come across as the most Canadian color to be wearing when competing for your country, but this is the jersey that I wore representing Canada at the International Blind Ice Hockey Competition. The reason why it's yellow, and I can get into a little bit more over the course of our discussion today, is that in blind hockey, one adaptation that we use to help facilitate the sport is that both teams wear highly contrasting jerseys. And in the case of playing against the Americans, Team Canada wore these very bright yellow jerseys that allowed us to stand out against the darker colored jerseys of the United States, the team we were playing against.
Thank you. We move on to Eitel. Do you want to introduce yourself and also describe yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Eitel Houedakor. I'm from Montreal. I will describe myself. Right now, I'm wearing a blue judo gi, which is the uniform for judo practitioners. My judo gi also has the Canadian maple leaf on the left side of my chest. And I'm wearing a white shirt underneath. I am a chocolate brown black man with, I think, dark brown sunglasses. I am the most recent recruit of the National Canadian Paralympic team of judo, and I've played many sports throughout my journey, and I'm happy to be with you guys today.
Thank you. Thank you. Emma, can you go next?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Emma. I also live in Ottawa. I'll describe myself. I'm wearing a white half zip sweater. On one side has a Lululemon logo, and the other side has a Canadian Parapan Am team logo. I'm a Caucasian female. I have long brown hair and it's in a ponytail. And I have glasses. Yeah, so I am a member of the Canadian National Women's Goalball team. I have been to one Paralympics. I have been in Tokyo 2020. I have been selected to the Paris 2024 team. I have attended 2 Parapan American Games and 2 World Championships. Yeah, so I train here out of Ottawa. I go to Carleton University for environmental studies. And that is a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And finally, Donovan, do you want to introduce yourself and also describe yourself?
So my name is Donovan Tildesley. I am 39, soon to be 40, Caucasian male from Vancouver, BC. I'm totally blind, so I don't even know what color I'm wearing today. I think I put on a Cycle for Sight jersey because that is the way I got involved with FBC in the first place, was through Cycle for Sight back 10 years ago. And so it was always a very meaningful tradition for me to first weekend of June in Vancouver pedal those 30 up to 90 kilometers for the event. I am a former Paralympic swimmer. I competed in Sydney, Athens, Beijing, and in London, winning 3 bronze, 2 silver medals, was the flag bearer in Beijing. I retired from sport about 10 years ago. And currently I work full-time as an insurance broker. And on the side, I'm still very active. In the winter, I'm skiing almost every weekend, and I'm still in the pool a few times a week.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so the way we're going to do this panel is basically we have a few prepared questions that I'm going to ask to each of the panelists. And then I will let the audience ask questions. Okay, so for the first question, I want to take all of you back to probably your childhood. So the first question is when were you first introduced to sports, and how was the initial experience? And I'll start with Eitel.
So the thing I can say here is that I was someone who lost sight later on in life, about 10 years ago, due to an accident. But before losing my sight, I was always a very active kid. I think my parents, they had to set up barriers in the house to keep me from running everywhere in the house and stuff. So before I lost my sight, I was pretty much involved in sprinting, rope climbing, and cycling. And when I lost my vision, my dad wanted me to keep doing sports. And my dad is a black belt judoka. And he was like, okay, now you're going to start judo with me. And he took me to his club, and he made me fall in love with the sport. And after that, after 1 year of practice, I was at that moment, that was about 10 years ago, I was in Canada, and I started going to school as well in a specialized school for blind people. And that's also how I got back into sprinting. I think it is called shot put, long jumps, and swimming, which I practiced for many years. And for the last 4 years, I have been focusing only on judo.
Thank you. Thank you. Emma, do you want to go next and share your first experiences with sports?
So I was not a sporty kid. My parents were sporty. So I was put into a lot of little kid sports. There were a lot of black guys from soccer balls. It didn't actually completely get into sports until high school. So my first year of high school, I went to W. Ross Macdonald in Ontario here for blind and low vision. And I was introduced to goalball. And I just kind of fell into it, really. I was very much an arts kid. it's not a very heroic story. It's just I kind of fell into goalball and then I kept playing. But if given the opportunity, I don't actually love to play sports that much. So other things are not really what I like to do for fun. Um, but yeah, so I was a teenager, 14.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Donovan, do you want to go next and share your initial experiences with sports?
So anyway, I was born completely blind with Leber's congenital amaurosis, so never had any sight whatsoever, but was lucky enough to be born into a family with parents who encouraged me to do everything that a sighted kid would do. And my dad was an ex-competitive swimmer, as well as a coach for a while back in the day. So from age of 6 months, I was put in the water. So really took to the pool. From age 3, I was put on skis and really enjoyed that. Now, fast forward to about age 8, I joined the swim team. And at the same time, my dad would go to the pool with me a couple times a week and we'd race back and forth. And I really got a kick out of the fact that I could swim a length of the pool faster, every week with the progression of the training. And kind of fast forward a few years, I've trained with some other coaches. And I learned at almost age 12 what the Paralympics were at a provincial championship in Kamloops, BC. And it made me think, well, if I continue to train and compete, maybe one day I'll get to that level. And sure enough, 4 years through a variety of circumstances, after my dad had coached me full time for about a year, was able to make it onto my first swim team and compete and win a bronze medal at the Sydney 2000 Games at age 16. And yeah, since then I've just, as I said, swam for 14 years on the national team. I still do swim a few times a week, although not competitively. And have just tried a whole variety of other sports, such as skiing, of course, rock climbing, and then some water sports like canoeing and kayaking. So I'm kind of at the older end of the athlete spectrum on this panel.
No, thank you. It's good to have the diversity on the panel, right? So I'll hand it over to Conrad. Do you want to share your initial experiences with sports?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a little bit of background very quickly. Similar to one of the fellow panelists, my vision loss story starts comparatively late to many that I know. I have retinitis pigmentosa, but I was only diagnosed when I was around 20 years old. I'm 27 now. And looking back, only began to perhaps realize very gently when I was in my late teens that perhaps now looking back, I can think that there were a couple of signs. So when I was first introduced to sports, it was essentially a pretty normal, if you can call it that, introduction. My parents enrolled my sibling and I in hockey, soccer, swimming. And I also just happened to really get into racket sports, playing badminton, ping pong, for some reason really worked. Doesn't work so well anymore, but it worked when I was younger. And I really enjoyed those sports when I was growing up. I think I just have a competitive streak in me that I was able to express in a really healthy way through competing in athletics. I enjoyed the dynamic nature of sports, particularly team sports, the constant variability in the way the game was played, having to make adjustments to how you approached the game. Just mentally, I always felt was really stimulating. And I've really maintained that outlook all throughout my life. I suppose the real point of interest would be how I was introduced to blind hockey and began my journey in the accessible or the parasport sphere. Because up until really a year or so ago, not only had I never heard of blind hockey, but I really had no experience. I'd never had any kind of introduction to accessible sports, period. Of course, you hear about the Paralympics, but I'd never had an opportunity to try any of these sports or activities that may have been more geared towards someone such as myself with vision loss. It was about a year or so ago that I first happened to see a video of blind hockey. I just saw a quick clip online, and it immediately caught my attention. I thought to myself, well, hey, I'm blind and I also love hockey, so maybe there's a fit there. It was something that I was really excited to pursue. It very quickly grew from a sort of subtle interest to a passion. And being able to play for the national team obviously is something that I'm incredibly proud of. But blind hockey, the community itself, has also given me a chance to work with para athletes from across the country, especially youth and child para athletes with vision loss, to show them the game and give them a really positive introduction. As I said off the top, I think one of the key messages that I hope we can get through in talking about accessible sports, and particularly for our audience, sports for those who are visually impaired, is that it can go beyond a hobby. We don't have to say, well, we're visually impaired, we'll just sort of do this in the backyard and that'll be it for how we interact with sports. We have the opportunity to excel and compete at very high levels. Whether that's something that you're interested in or not, I hope you can take away that there's a whole raft of accessible sports out there. And my main message is just to try one, because you never know how it could turn out.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. I really resonate with the description of losing the sight later in the age and then trying to find new passions. That is my journey as well. So thank you for sharing. All right. So my next question is, what adaptations do you use to in your sport to make it accessible for you? And I'm going to start with Emma.
Okay, so my sport is unique in the way that it actually doesn't require anything to make it accessible. Goalball is already an accessible sport. It is the only sport without an able-bodied equivalent. So it was created for blind and low vision after World War II for a lot of the soldiers that went blind. Yeah, so in terms of accessibility, there's really not much. We all have blackout eye shades. That makes the playing field level for everybody, regardless of whether you're completely blind or partially sighted. We have a classification system like most Paralympic sports. So, if you have too much vision, then you are not eligible to play. Yeah, I mean, in terms of accessibility, it really is a very accessible sport.
Thank you. That's really nice. Let's move on to Donovan.
Basically, and I would show this on the camera if I had more camera room. With blind swimming, you don't know where the wall is going to be. So there's something called a tapper. It's a plastic stick with a foam Q-tip on the end, and somebody stands at either end of the pool and gives you a whack on the head. And so that's how you know when you've come to the end of a length or end of a race. As of now, I don't use a tapper because I'm just swimming on my own without doing any sort of training or master's program. But when I was competing and training, I needed that all the time. So basically, as a completely blind or S11, B1, some say swimmer, you need somebody with you at the pool majority of the time to make sure you can train to your full capacity. That's basically the only adaptation. People, anybody without sight can swim between lane ropes, and those are fairly good barriers. My other sport was skiing, a little bit more intricate in that I've got a earpiece in my helmet, kind of like a motorcycle helmet, and I have a guide who skis behind me with a microphone. I also have one as well, but it's more important that they can communicate to me than I can to them. And then we have a third person who goes out as what we call a tail gunner or a blocker, who makes sure that we're staying out of the way of rocks or human hazards on the mountain. So skiing as a completely blind person, it's a lot of fun, but it does mean a lot of extra work for those sighted guides or even friends I've trained up to guide me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. Let's move to Conrad. How do you make hockey accessible?
Yeah, it's a great question, isn't it? And I think that it's not necessarily self-evident, which is why when I have a chance to speak about my passion about blind hockey, I always try to highlight those little ways in which we've made the game more accessible for people such as myself with vision loss. I think there was one key point that I just want to reiterate that Emma and Donovan both touched on is a categorization system for those of us who compete competitively and have vision loss. Essentially, what that allows us to do is to categorize athletes based on the amount of vision that they have. In the case of blind hockey, all players of the sport at a competitive level are legally blind, so they have a baseline vision loss or less. Within that or less category, it's broken up into B3, B2, and B1. Essentially, the short version is the larger the number, the more sight that you have. So blind hockey uses these category systems to essentially maintain a level playing field in the amount of vision that's on the ice at any given time. Each player falls into a particular category, and so at any given time, you're only allowed so many players of each category on the ice. As I said, in so doing, you're able to maintain a fairly level, even playing field, or if you will, level off the amount of sight that's on the ice at any given time. Perhaps I started with the more complex adaptations, so I'll just hit a couple of simpler ones very quickly. The first one is the puck, and I have one on my mantle that I keep. Sorry, you probably noticed what the next thing I'm going to say. The first thing to notice about the puck, if you do have some vision and you can see it on the screen, is that it's considerably larger than a traditional hockey puck. A traditional hockey puck is made of rubber. It's maybe the size of the palm of your hand. And as many of us, I'm sure, can appreciate, when that's zipping around on the ice, it can be really difficult to pick up with what limited usable vision we each have. So having a much larger puck, in this case, one made of metal and with tiny ball bearings on the inside, not only is it larger, so we can use what limited vision we have to better detect it on the ice, but it also makes a tremendous amount of noise. I'll shake it just for a second. That sound is constantly being emanated on the ice surface whenever the puck is moved around, and it provides a secondary sort of sensory output to help blind hockey players detect the puck while it's moving around on the ice. Aside from the puck, and I touched on it very quickly off the top, the jerseys are also a really meaningful adaptation. Again, if you have some vision, you may be able to notice that I'm wearing essentially a neon yellow jersey. Not a particularly Canadian color, but one that makes it a lot easier to differentiate when you're skating around on the ice. Just as an example, you might have one team wearing this very vibrant yellow color, and the other team could be wearing a darker red color. That contrast makes it easier to know who to pass to and who not to pass to. There's a few other details along the way, but I think that gives it a good quick snapshot. The most important takeaway is that regardless of your level of vision loss, blind hockey offers an opportunity for you to participate and to compete and have a lot of fun with your friends. And some of these minor adaptations, along with a few others, make it that much more enjoyable.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you. The ball bearings, I've seen the soccer balls with ball bearings in them as well, and it's I've been told this in terms of people in the cyclocross community that sound is our friend and we can use it as much as we can. Yes, thank you. Moving on to Eitel.
Yes, so in judo, it's interesting. When I was at my first international tournament, which was just a couple of months ago, I was introduced to the rules for Paralympic judo. And those rules are that there's always a grip, which is common for blind judokas. But at the same time, if ever you break the grip with one hand, so normally when you start fighting, I'm going to do the gesture. So I'm going to grab the right side of the judogi, the collar of my opponent, and I will grab the sleeve of the left arm of my opponent. With that, we are even at the beginning. Then if I break the grip, let's say with one of my hands, I have 3 to 5 seconds to attack. If I don't, I get shiro, which is a fault. And after 3 faults, you lose the fight. And if one of us breaks the grip with both hands, you will start the fight again until one's win. So these are the rules for Paralympic judo. But when I fought in the sided tournament, that was the provincial tournament for Quebec in 2023, I got the bronze medal of the U21 minus 81 kilogram category. There, the rules were a little different, where the sighted people's rules applied to me. And the only thing that I had was the grip at the start of the fight. So when we start the fight, the opponent and I both grab the judogi. And then after, if the opponent breaks the grip with one arm, he can do that for as long as he wants. And if we break the grip completely, then we will start again. But the rest of the fight is just me having to, also forces me to develop the ability to be reactive, because when the sided opponent breaks the grip, I have to be able to sense his movement and counterattack or attack myself.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. All right. So moving on to the next question. So this is an interesting one. What barriers have you faced as someone with a sight loss in the sports world? And of course, these barriers doesn't need to be like specific to only your playing the sport, but it can also be like financial barriers or accessing some services that are needed to train and get better at the sport. So I'm going to start with Conrad.
Yeah, you highlight a really important point, which is barriers to what is meant to be an accessible sport. And I guess what I would say is that I'm very fortunate that I do not have a long list of examples to give you. And I think that's in large part due to the incredible work that the body of blind hockey, Canadian Blind Hockey, the organization, does for its players. Whether that is the annual tournaments that Canadian Blind Hockey hosts, and making sure that those events are highly accessible to all of the athletes, regardless of level of vision, be that at the hotels, at the arenas, making sure that we have guides if needed, making sure, and who thinks of these things except for those of us in the visually impaired community, but making sure that we have people to watch athletes' guide dogs while they're competing. Little details like these, I think, are the important ones that I'm very fortunate that the body that operates over blind hockey in Canada is always looking out for and allows us to have a really seamless experience as athletes. The other point that you mentioned as well, I think is equally important, and that is concerns around financial barriers in order to be able to play a sport. I'm very conscious of the fact, and I think Canadian Blind Hockey is also conscious of the fact that hockey is not known to be a cheap sport to play. The reality is that there is a considerable amount of equipment that does need to be purchased in order to safely be able to play the sport. And that, I think, is why Canadian Blind Hockey has been so intentional around making sure that financial aid is available to players, whether that be in transportation to and from events, fees associated with participating in tournaments. Lowering those financial barriers as much as possible, I think, is an equally important aspect of making sports accessible. Now, I think I have to give a really strong shout out to Canadian Blind Hockey for the work that they've done on both sides of that in terms of the accessibility piece in regards to our vision loss, but also the accessibility piece, as you mentioned, about reducing other barriers like financial barriers that can deter people from being able to play the sport that they love.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's a very comprehensive description. Thank you. So I'll move to Eitel. Eitel, do you want to share barriers around judo?
Yes. So I would say that the biggest barrier that I'm facing right now is in the fact that there's not enough blind judo practitioners. to the point where when I performed at the provincial tournament, I was with sighted people. And the reality is, in fighting sports, there's an advantage to seeing your opponent, anticipating their actions and things like that. So if I was to stay in the sighted league, even if I become extremely good, there are sighted people that have an edge on me, and that will allow them to win sometimes. Since I joined the Paralympic team now, the reality is that there's not enough people, so there's no national or provincial blind judoka tournament. So I don't have as much practice with fighting against other blind people, and at the international level now, that puts me in a way to a disadvantage, because I'm fighting most of the time with sighted people. In one way, makes me good, and on the other hand, I have to also get used to fighting against blind people, which do not fight exactly the same like sighted people. So this is the biggest barrier in the amount of people that practice judo nationally in Canada, and even internationally. From what I've heard and what I've observed, there's not that many blind judokas around the world. And the second thing I would say would also lead into the financial barrier, because with international tournaments comes costs relating to travel, and just in general, all the costs relating to the equipment and things for the athletes, like the judo keys, which are very specific. You need to have a very specific length for your judo key. If your judo key doesn't have the appropriate length around the collar, around the skirt, which is like the bottom part of the top of the judo gi, the length of the pants, their size, their width, you will not be allowed to participate in any international tournament. Even if it's the day before the actual tournament, if your judo gi doesn't pass the test, you don't fight. And even in between fights, they control the judo gis.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. It's important to highlight the fact that we need more people to do the sport, so that just having more people itself makes it more accessible, which is very interesting to point out. All right, so we'll move on to Emma. Emma, do you want to talk about how you have faced some barriers in goalball?
Yeah, sure. So similar to what everyone has been saying, we also have financial barriers. That's either fundraising problems or just, financial support in general. Goalball is not a very well-known sport, so it's really hard to do fundraisers or things like that, just because nobody knows what we are. Nobody knows who we are. Nobody knows what we do. The other thing too is our equipment in terms of nets can be very expensive. The nets are very large, they're heavy. A lot of times we don't train with nets. We don't have anywhere to keep them. Not many places want to keep 9-foot nets. So, finding places for storage is a problem. We have balls that we need to keep somewhere, also very hard. We also have problems accessing gym time. So when we can get it, we usually practice at, public schools. Sometimes recreation centers, it just depends, but we don't have a set place where we can practice, at least here in Ottawa. So finding gym time can be a huge pain. Yeah, I would say just the barriers to training itself is probably our biggest problem. And again, like I said, we don't practice with nets here in Ottawa. So a lot of times we're using like stages for public schools and gyms, which makes us all the more better when we do have a net, but it's not quite the same. So we just have barriers to location.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. It always amazes me that how adaptive and resourceful the sight loss community is when it comes to barriers. Is we somehow find a way to get around the barriers. Ideally, the less the barriers, the more easier it is to do the sports. Thank you. So finally, Donovan, do you want to talk about barriers around swimming and skating?
Well, kind of to dovetail on what Conrad said, sighted guide support is key. And that's the reason when I was competing, there were only two other completely blind swimmers that swam around the same time as me. And they didn't necessarily have as long a career. And part of that had to do with finding the sighted support to act as tappers. Sometimes at practices that would, twice a day, you need somebody to commit to going to and from the pool, and not just a tapper, but they would also act as the guide, getting you, on a pool deck and sorting you out when you were on a trip, in terms of finding your way around. I was very lucky in that I had a lot of family support to do that. So my dad was coached me and was a tapper for many years. My mom also did some, as did my younger brother and sister. But not everybody, I'm aware, has that. So that made it a big challenge for some people. Same for skiing. Up until a few years ago, I would exclusively use our adaptive ski program at Whistler, which is the resort 2 hours north of me. And there were often times that they didn't have enough on staff, so I'd have to miss a weekend of skiing. During COVID, I was able to change that around because they weren't taking participants from outside the local area, so I trained some of my own friends to come out and guide, which kind of deepened the pool a bit. And as long as they were good skiers and I trusted them, I realized they didn't have to necessarily be fully trained. It was all about just getting a day on the mountain. And again, financial for sure. Traveling to and from swim meets, especially if you're not a carded athlete, if you're not funded by government of Canada to do sport, it can cause a financial strain, and not everybody has the resources to pay for that. So hence, some swimmers may not be able to get to certain qualifying meets or get enough racing time in to get to where they need to be. I guess similar to for skiing, just the cost of getting to the mountain and the cost of a ski pass for the day. Those would be, and for those swimmers, I was very lucky with I swam a lot of my training I did was on my own. But for the majority of swimmers, they're done as a part of a team, and normally that team is a fully able-bodied team, and the coach may not be as receptive to having a visually impaired swimmer on that team, because it means they may need to make certain adaptations. They have less people in the lane. The coach might have to double as a tapper, and they might have to provide the swimmer with more one-on-one instruction. And for those who have that, that's great. But for a lot of people, that's a real struggle in getting to the next level in the sport.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, the financial barrier is a really important one, and I see that across the board. That is no matter what sports we do, the financial barrier still exists. So yeah, that's a really important thing to highlight. Okay, so I'm gonna be mindful of time. I have one final quick question before I open the floor to everyone, and I would like the panelists to be brief when they answer this. So I appreciate that. So, okay, the final question is, as people have seen, there was a mental health aspect to the panel as well, and we haven't touched on that directly yet. So that's where I wanna end the questions that I have is. So my question to the panelist is, how does the physical activity and in particular doing the sports help you with your mental health? And I'm going to start with Donovan.
I would say sport it keeps me grounded. It keeps me balanced. It keeps me in a routine. If I didn't have to get up and, well, make myself go to the pool and swim 3 times a week, I doubt I would be as productive at work as I am. And I even notice that when I don't swim, and just that feeling of being in the water for that 45, 50 minutes, you get all those negative, frustrating thoughts out of your head, and you come out of that pool, and man, it just feels like a great way to start the day. Similarly with skiing, winter can be a very dark time all across Canada, and to have somewhere to go on the weekends where you're outside getting the fresh air, being with people, that's incredibly therapeutic on a lot of levels, and really at least gives me a boost for the week ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. Emma, do you want to talk about it, mental health and sports?
Yeah. Similarly to Donovan, the routine is fantastic. Getting myself out of the house, going to the gym is a great way to start the day. Also, too, I think that it's really important to be able to be aware of how having sport as a career can affect your mental health. And it's not always very easy. There's a lot of things that you don't think about, and when you dedicate your entire life to something like that, you really have to be aware about of juggling the mental health with the career aspect of it. But for the most part, I would say the routine is probably the best thing for my mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, moving on to Conrad.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Emma, I think, was getting at there. I don't want to understate the immense positive impact that sport has had on my life. But I also don't want to give the false impression that every tournament you go to and every practice you have is just fantastic and everything goes the way you want it to go, because it doesn't. Sometimes, I mean, I look back on my own experience in the context of hockey. It's like sometimes I come off the ice at the end of a period or at the end of a game, and I'm like, geez, I stunk out there. I just and sometimes that can affect your mental health in a negative way. But I guess what I would go back to really reinforce the positive about my experience with sport is that I think as you play a sport, not only does it have that positive impact on your physical health, but I think it has a similarly progressively positive impact on your mental health. You learn how to better adjust and be resilient in situations where resiliency is key. You also learn how to be gentle and forgive yourself in moments where you really ought to have compassion for yourself, as an athlete. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the positive impact that sport has on your self-confidence and your self-esteem, especially when I think about how I approach skill development. I try to look at it in the growth of small skills or small incremental improvements over time. And one of the ways that I probably get the biggest boost out of playing a sport, and playing a sport like blind hockey in particular, is coming off the ice and saying, I really want to do this one small thing, and I did it. And I'm very proud of the fact that I can acknowledge that I've made an incremental improvement in a skill that I've been targeting. And that kind of improvement and progression over time does a lot for your self-confidence, and I think does a lot for your mental health.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That's very well said. I totally agree with that. All right. Finally, Eitel, do you want to talk about how
Yes.
sports help you with mental health?
I'll say a few things before, because sports has become a career just recently for me. But before that, I was very academically driven. And when I graduated from high school and even when I was in college, I had many academic awards, but I would have never been able to get those without sports, because I knew, because I had sport practice in the morning, I would start my day, would get all the endorphins, would make me very energetic to perform in the class. Or sometimes because I knew after classes that I didn't like. I was going to have my fun with sports. I stayed really focused to just give my best during class and then after have fun. The other thing I would say, sport made me realize the potential of my body, realized my confidence. It made me realize what I was capable of doing physically. That made me more confident, made me walk straighter. And with judo, sorry, before even judo, I would say that with sport as well, I learned to have a better posture. And as you know, having a bad posture increases your cortisol levels and your levels of stress. And sports made me realize that I had to practice and make effort to have a good posture. And with judo now, I've learned how, I'm realizing more and more how I'm not the best, but even though I'm good in certain things, judo is all about falling, but more importantly, judo is about learning how every fall is just a step before the next rise. So even though sometimes I fall, it's okay. I'll learn from my experience. And next time I will learn to not do what was wrong, or I will learn what will help me win the next fight or do something a little better for the next fight.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing. This was a wonderful panel. I can keep asking questions to the panel, but I would really like everyone in the audience to get the opportunity to ask questions. So the floor is open for questions, so people can either raise their hands or put their questions in the chat.
Do we have any questions? Oh, I see Danica, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I guess my question is to whoever wants to answer it, since it's relevant to everyone, but considering you guys all play at more of a national or international level, I'm curious, what's the process to be recruited on those teams? Are there scouts? Are there tryouts? How do you go from more recreational to that higher level game?
I think it's different for every sport. For swimming, you've got to join a local team, and then you've got to make certain qualifiers for regional, provincial, and then national qualifications. And when you're at the national meet, as we just had a few weeks ago, the swimming trials for Olympic and Paralympic, they put all the athletes together in a race, even if you have different disabilities. But the way they pick the team is based on a point system. 1,100 points is the world record. If you're the qualifying standard that is closer to 1,100 points in that disability class, you have a better chance of making the team. But there's definitely a few layers to that. Skiing, I can't even go into because that has to do with going to multiple competitions and gaining FIS points along the way. So I'll let anybody else want to take that.
Yeah, goalball is similar in the way that you do have to be part of the provincial team. So if you start recreationally, then you can be invited to play provincially. You just have to be a member of the PSO and the NSO. And then the Canadian Blind Sports, we do like a selection camp, and then they'll nominate names for the national team. It's not as official, but it goes through the National Sport Organization through nominations, and then you're put into a pool and maybe on the team. Mm-hmm.
I can speak to blind hockey. Canadian Blind Hockey, the body that looks over the sport all across Canada, has a number of recreational programs or teams that are located in cities all across the country. That's probably the most grassroots way to first get involved in blind hockey, whether that's your first time playing hockey or maybe your first time getting on skates. From there, though, Canadian Blind Hockey hosts national and regional tournaments every year. That's going to be a great opportunity for you to compete with players that maybe at a higher level, particularly those outside of your city or outside of your province. By competing in those tournaments, you're going to have the opportunity for the coaching staff of the Canadian national blind hockey team to see you play and get a chance to meet with you. with that exposure and demonstration of skill, you may have the opportunity to be invited to the national team's training camp. That's ultimately when the national team is selected by the coaching staff. That national team then goes on to play in international competition, at the moment primarily against the USA, but we hope that in the years to come, Canadian blind hockey can grow outside of North America.
Thank you. And I really want to hear Eitel's opinion on this, because he had earlier mentioned about very limited number of people in judo. So Eitel.
So for judo, I would say anyone who wants to start judo, just go to any judo club, start practicing judo first. After some time, when you start getting good, you can ask, either your own coach will contact the Canadian Judo Federation, or you can ask your coach to see and contact either the provincial federation judo team, judo association, or the Judo Canada directly. And through that, they might put you in contact with the national coach for the Paralympic team, and they might come out to see you practicing your judo. And if they find you good enough, you will be invited then to join the team, or you will have a certain, I'll say, period where they will observe your judo, check out your potential, maybe give you more chances if you participate to some kind of provincial tournament. Even though you'll be against sighted people like me, if you perform, they will see that you have a lot of potential. So then they will start to have you join the team, make accommodations for you to come train with the national team and things like that.
Thank you. Morgan, do we have more questions? Are we out of time?
I think we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. But thank you so much, Ali, and all of our panelists. That was a great discussion. I think, as Conrad mentioned before, we have not, at least my time here, ever had a conversation about sports and movement, and I thought that was really, really great. So thank you to everyone for participating.